Rebetson Masinta. Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us. A very special welcome to our two panelists, Dr. Sarah Ciment, who is a physical therapist and inclusion expert, as well as a dedicated mother of four from Virginia, USA. She will be interviewed by our very own Ilana Africa Bredenkamp, who is a well-known local TV and radio host in South Africa. I personally am very excited to hear Dr. Ciment, as her topic, Include Everyone, Now is Not the Time to be Judgmental, seems so relevant and applicable in the world we live in today, a world that has become so divided, so tumultuous and crazy, a world in which we need to think and care about others more now than ever before. Now is the time for inclusion. What an appropriate topic to talk about in these most challenging times. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. On to you, Ilana.
Thank you so much, Kaya. And here we are again on a Thursday evening. So a warm welcome, especially if you're joining us for the very first time. We've had some meaningful conversations in this space. And today I'm really lucky because I took her away from her holiday and I was like, vacation for who? Okay. We found her and we said, today is the day that you're going to be talking to us. Include everyone. Now is not the time to be judgmental. We heard it. I'm Ilana Africa Bredenkamp. And today I have the privilege live from Virginia, USA. I'm not even sure if you're in Virginia. Where are you on vacation?
I am in Virginia, but up in the mountains in Virginia. So I escaped from the city.
Dr. Sarah Ciment, known as a physical therapist. Here in South Africa, we say a physiotherapist.
Yes.
So known as a physiotherapist and an inclusion expert. Now listen, I've met many physiotherapists in my life, but I haven't met many inclusion experts, and that's what we're focusing on tonight. So we want people to walk away knowing that now is a time to include everyone. Now is the time to include yourself. But first of all, before we start, give me a little bit about you for people around the world who's watching tonight that don't know you. Who is Dr. Sarah Ciment?
Well, let's start with my personal. First of all, thank you, Ilana. Thank you, Mrs. Rebetson Masinta, for bringing me on. But a little bit about me. So as you heard, I'm up in the mountains in Virginia, and no matter where you go, everything follows, right? So I've got my 4 kids here with me, ages 11, 8, 6, and 2. And so my life is still quite busy. And my husband is working, so he's working back in the city. So we are taking turns during the week. And so things are definitely hectic and very busy. So we'll leave it at that on my personal level. My children have been out of school for a long time. I know South Africa is a little different than America at the moment, but we've been out since before Passover, since before Pesach. And so it has been a very serious adjustment for everybody, as it has been for everyone all over the world. My mom, who is in her 70s, is staying with us. We are very lucky, and she is in that high risk category as being a little bit older. And so as young as she is, we get to experience being really careful and mindful about all the things that we're doing. So it helps when you have to think about somebody else in your space in this conversation of inclusion. It's very, very important. So personally, that's where I am personally. And professionally, you know, it's interesting. I took a job about 6 years ago as director of the Ruderman Family Foundation, the Chabad Inclusion Initiative. They gave money to Chabad headquarters in New York. And they said, here is a grant to help all of those Chabad centers around the world become more inclusive of people with disabilities and mental health conditions. Can you help provide resources, education to all these 4,500 Chabad houses and see if you can help them become more inclusive of the people with disabilities in their community? And when we first started, they said, well, you're going to need to work with an inclusion expert. And I said, what in the world is an inclusion expert? I had no idea what that was. And I said, how do I become one? Do I get a degree? Is there a master's program? What can I do? And what I learned quickly is that there's no such thing. And there is no degree. There's no special education you can take. But at this point, I have become somebody that can now actually say that I'm an inclusion expert. It's been quite a few years. And when you become an inclusion expert, it's actually about working in the space of inclusion, learning what it really means and practicing it. And so at this point, it's actually bizarre for me to call myself an inclusion expert, but I have learned that the truth is when you have the insight and you have the understanding, that's where you get to share it with others, and that's where the area of expertise comes in. One more thing, professionally, locally in Virginia where I live, started and founded here the local Friendship Circle. And our mission is to build an inclusive community, one friendship at a time. This mission of inclusion has truly infiltrated every area of my life, both professionally and especially personally. And so that's going to be an interesting topic for us today to talk about and figure out what that means. Because usually when we mention that word inclusion, everybody has no idea what that means. We start and they have their own preconceived ideas of what that is.
Well, having 4 children and also me having 2, exclusion, means you didn't get an invite to the party and there's a birthday and you learn about it on Facebook or your friends talk about it. But let's talk about inclusion. What does that word mean to you?
So when you first start, and I'm sure you have your own ideas of inclusion, and those people that are watching have their ideas of inclusion, because we've heard that word so much and it has gotten muddied over the years, and it can mean so many different things to different groups of people, different individuals. And usually we use that term in a way that has been our experience in the past. And sometimes people have had a positive experience when it comes to inclusion, and sometimes their experience has been negative. So if you think about having inclusion of someone with a disability, if you were in a place where somebody with a disability was in your class or in your community center or in your world, and it didn't go well, your experience of inclusion or what you think it should be is tainted. And if you were a person with a disability and you were included somewhere and that didn't go well, it also doesn't sound like a good word. It sounds like something that really in theory might be nice, but practically doesn't work. So one of the things that I've come to learn over the years is that inclusion really means to support someone and give them an opportunity. And that's what it means. So when you go to somebody, this idea that everyone should be included and everyone should do the same thing at the same time in the same place, we all know that that doesn't make sense, right? Think about our own lives. My kids are now doing something different than the adults because that makes sense. That's what they each need to be supported. If we put them in the same place in our synagogue or our local community center, if I went to a lecture in the evening and I brought my kids, that's not called inclusion, that's just called being silly because it doesn't make sense and it doesn't work. So what I have learned is that inclusion means you have to actually look at the people you're trying to include and the people that want to be included. And you have to think, what can I do to support these individuals to give them an opportunity to belong and to participate in a meaningful way? And I have to ask them. I can't think about someone else and say, oh, I think I know what it means for them to want to participate. I need to ask. And I need to say, Alana, how do you want to participate in this? Tell me what questions you want me to ask. What do you want me to answer? And that is how inclusion becomes something real. Because if you try to put everyone in the same place at the same time, it's usually complete chaos, which we have learned during pandemic, because now I'm trying to work from home. I've got kids downstairs, and it doesn't work very well. So inclusion needs to think about the individual needs and how to support them and make an opportunity a real possibility. If you just say everyone is welcome, everyone is coming, we're inclusive, I have lately been saying that's kind of an empty invitation. If you don't figure out the details and you don't figure out how to make that happen as to the best of your ability, right? Sometimes we can't. Sometimes if someone says, I need to jump from a plane to feel included, I may not be able to make that happen. But I have to dig deeper and really take the time and the patience to figure out what is it that you really want and how can I do that with what I have available. And if I don't have it available, is it important enough to me to find a way to get it? Can I do it? Can we do this? Are you important enough that I can spend my time to support you?
I love how you say that inclusion actually involves everyone else. You ask the questions to how can I help you? And I want to unpack that a little bit. I see some eyes have joined us, so a warm welcome if you just joined us. Include everyone. That now is not the time to be judgmental. That is the conversation that we're unpacking today. Live all the way from Virginia, USA. We've got Dr. Sarah Krantz-Cement. She's chatting with us as someone who understands people and someone who understands inclusion. She's an inclusion expert. And I can't help but think, doctor, that with this goes a sense of empathy. It's almost like you need to understand what this person finds themselves in before you can offer them support. So I want to know, what are some of the lessons that you have learned working in the area of inclusion? And you know where my head's going, particularly now in South Africa, where people are being diagnosed with COVID. People are discriminating against something that they don't know. You know, sometimes we blame, how can you bring COVID to us? You know, people don't get supported because we don't understand this virus. Lockdown and our businesses are suffering. Some people are rich and others are poor. You know, we're not going to hang out with them. They're liquidating, you know. So how do we practice inclusion in this time that we're living in? But more importantly, what lessons have you learned working in the area of inclusion?
So there's so many great questions in the question that you just asked, right? If I could try to drill down a little bit, I was on a conference call this morning with some colleagues, and one of them has a physical disability that you can see, a visible disability. She's a wheelchair user. She walks with a walker. She has cerebral palsy. And she said to me, "Thank God I have a disability because it's very hard for me to wear a mask in public." And she said, and when I go out, I'm used to people staring at me anyway. And so when I don't wear a mask and people don't know why, because here in Virginia, according to the state, if you have a disability and it's hard for you to breathe, you don't need to wear a mask in public spaces, but otherwise you do. So she said, "Thank God I have a disability. I'm so happy because when I go out, I'm used to this already. And if someone is looking at me, they kind of give me a pass already." And isn't that interesting? We have this experience, or we think we may understand where someone is coming from, but until we get a chance to talk to them, we truly don't know. So there's two phrases in the disability community that I have learned over the last many years working in that space that have stayed with me and I think answer this question. One of those phrases is "nothing about us without us." And that is such an important phrase. It is. I've taken it to my children's school, to their classes. I've taken it to my husband and my children, my colleagues. Nothing about us without us is a term that was coined, I think, by the disability community, saying, for those of you that really have great intentions and want to make people with disabilities have great programs and inclusion, make sure that there's someone with a disability in a leadership role who is making those decisions. Make sure you've got input from the people that you are talking about. And what an incredible lesson that is for all of us now today. I'm making my children's schedule, right? We're here at home. Every 5 minutes, I come up with a brand new color-coded schedule that never works. And what I realize is that if I don't ask my 8-year-old son, "What do you want to do today?" Which, by the way, we're now like at least 3 months in. And this week he said to me, "Why do you keep signing me up for things I don't want to do?" And as much as I say you have to do them because I need to work or for whatever other reasons, it's the same concept. If I don't ask someone, "I want to work with you. I want to be useful to you." Not just I want to help you. I want to be useful. What is it that you need? What is it that you want? And let's see if we can work together to make that happen. So this idea that you're saying you have people that have COVID and the people that have been diagnosed, this idea of isolating them, again, isolating for health reasons is one thing, but to isolate for a feeling or for any other reason aside from health and safety is actually quite foreign to me, because why would we do that? Everybody gets COVID. Eventually, a lot of people are going, I don't know, I'm not a professional in the medical health industry, so I'm not going to put that on record, but in my family, we've had many members who got COVID, and in the beginning, it was interesting. They actually wanted to be quiet about it. They didn't want to talk about it because there was a stigma attached to it when we first began. And yet, isn't that interesting that that is how so many different things come up? In the beginning, in the disability community, people also didn't want to talk about disabilities. It wasn't something you kept out in the open. Many years ago, people were hidden away. It was very terrible because it was something new, something an unknown. And unknowns are those things that make us nervous and scared. And how do you combat that? By asking, by walking over to someone, that idea of nothing about us without us. How do I go over to someone that has COVID and I can say, what would you like your community to know? Something that I've always wanted to do is have one of those video sessions like this, a podcast or a whatever it might be, a social media approach where people say what I want someone to know, what I want my community to know. And if it's someone with a disability, somebody with COVID, someone with an invisible illness that nobody knows about, there's so many opportunities to ask people, tell me how you feel, what do you need to be supported, and what can we do? And that gives the opportunity to have a conversation that leads to understanding and knowledge, and where people don't feel isolated anymore because someone really wants to know what I need. That's a game changer.
Yeah, and I like how you say that's what you need. Having spoken to you earlier, Doctor, I understand that your life also works according to hashtags because you understand social media. If you could give one hashtag to what you've just said about including people, having a conversation so that you understand where they are coming from, what would it be?
The hashtag is just ask. It's one that we've been trying to promote for a long time. And that is really the essence of what inclusion is. You can't include unless you know what you're doing and unless you know what you're trying to include. So if you ask someone, what is it that you need? What do you want? And then let's see what we can do versus trying in our heads. I'm going to decide. I'm going to make the best decisions. And by the way, think about how many times, I'm sure you do it because I do it all the time and I'm sure we all do it. How many times do I think about what, again, my spouse, my husband, my children, my mom, my colleagues, my boss, my employees? How often do I think I know exactly what's going to be a great gift for someone? I know exactly what they need. I know how to help, whatever it might be, right? We make those decisions, and very often we forget that basic principle of just ask. And it takes time to get there. You mentioned the word empathy. It takes a long time to build true empathy with someone. You have to spend so much time investing in that person to where you might be able to anticipate what they need before you ask. But that takes time.
We've got a few comments from you, and a warm welcome if you just joined us. We're talking about inclusivity. Yulan Andrews says, agreed that inclusivity does not just happen. It requires education and sensitivity from all groups and individuals, and they need to ensure sensitivity in our attempts to be inclusive. So even in inclusiveness, you need to be sensitive to inclusivity. Like, it's just a whole, like, I consider you, and I know that you're important enough, and you said it earlier, that I will give my time to understand what you need. But doctor, I've got a challenge for you, because here's the thing. If you've met one disabled person, you've met all of them. If you've met one person with autism, you understand all autistic people. If you've met one Black person, you understand all Black people. If you've met one Jew, you know all Jews.
Well, that is a great question, and you brought me back to my point. Thank you. In regard to that, there's another phrase, the second phrase, in addition to nothing about us without us, the second phrase from the disability community that I've learned is that if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. And for all the examples you just gave, it's the same. I am a woman, I am Jewish, I am a professional, I am a mother, I am a wife, I am so many different things, and yet I am not able to speak on behalf of any of those groups. I'm not. I can say what I think, I can say my experiences, I can say that I've spoken to a lot of different people. But until I am one of those people, until I've walked a mile in someone's shoes, that phrase we've heard so many times, we are not in the same place, and I cannot speak for someone else. So in regard to the disability community, whoever made that comment, you are 100% right. It takes time, it takes patience, and it takes the know-how and the wherewithal to be able to ask. And you know what else is interesting? How many times have we seen in the grocery store, or perhaps there's someone with a wheelchair user, or perhaps there is someone who has an amputated leg, and suddenly your kids are walking with you, or somebody's there, and you see somebody look at that person and then quickly turn away, or point, because one of your little 2-year-old points and says, "What's wrong with his leg?" And you quickly shush them, and you say, no, just look the other way, don't talk. And for my friends that I have who have disabilities, many of them have said to me, I wish that parent would use an opportunity to come over and just ask me, here's my 2-year-old, can you explain to them, why do you use a walker? Why do you use a cane? Why do you have a hearing device, etc.? And so many times we're nervous about asking. We're nervous about finding out because we might offend. We may not be able to ask the right questions. We may not feel confident to ask those things. But that is the very key to learning this discussion and to being able to make a change. If you can bring it up and say, I'm so sorry, I don't know so much about what you're going through, but I really would love to learn. Can you tell me X, Y, and Z? So it's true. You need to ask. You need to take the time.
Well, you just heard it. Hashtag just ask is the hashtag. And I think one can apply it to life. If you've just joined us, include everyone. Now is not the time to be judgmental. We have the privilege of speaking to Dr. Sarah Krantz-Cement, and you're welcome to pass some comments or even ask some questions. And soon I will have a look at it. My name's Ilana. Hi, I'm from South Africa, all the way from Virginia. She's answering our questions. Because you mentioned inclusiveness, all I see is help, support, where's my voice? What do we say when we are differently abled and we want a voice and be included? What can you say about that?
I think you may have to clarify your question. What can we say? What does that mean? Does that mean for each person? Are you asking how they can find their voice? Or are you asking for the disability community?
I'm asking for both.
It's a great question. So in regards to the disability community, there's been so many strides made in the last many years. Actually, in this month is the 30 years since the Americans with Disability Act was founded 30 years ago. It's celebrated this year in America, which is where education, public education became available for the disability community. Transportation, public spaces, there's still a long way to go in that space. But that has become the norm. It's become expected. And yet, when it comes to disability inclusion, and similar, if you think about it, in the last year for sure, we've had so many groups of people come out and say, I need to be seen. I want to be heard. Women have come out in the last year for sure with different movements and different things that have been going on and saying for so many years we have not been heard. And we have the Black and African American and America's culture right now is coming out and saying we need to be heard. Being heard is part of this topic. And so when someone says in the disability community, I want to be seen, I want to be heard, it's the same principles of inclusion that apply. Ask and listen and figure out what is going on. What does that person want to be heard? And you know what, actually, when it comes to our own individuality in this topic, how do we learn from being inclusive? I want to bring up one more thing. There's 3 different kinds of listening. I just heard someone mention that to me recently. And that actually was incredibly helpful. And this goes to this discussion. It bridges what we know from to work with someone else, how we work with someone else, and how do we work with the people around us and ourselves. So 3 kinds of listening. 1 is listening to fix. 2 is listening to win. And 3 is listening to learn. And if I think about all the discussions / arguments that I have with the people in my life, so many times I'm listening to either fix, that's usually mine. I usually try to fix things. But listening to learn is so important. And sometimes listening to fix is important and listening to win is important. It depends what the forum is. But for most of us, listening to learn is really the essence of inclusion. So if we look at the people around us and someone says, I want to be included, or I am not being seen, I need to be heard. Listen to learn. Don't try to fix it. Don't try to win an argument. Don't try to argue with that person. Rather, just listen. And then see what you can do. And when it comes to our own self in this climate, where from what I hear from you in South Africa now, especially, you guys are in lockdown. You're in that mode again. And for all of us, it has seemed that the outside, right, we sort of the things on either end are the ones that have been exaggerated, the things that are really good in our lives or the things that are really hard in our lives. I've been able to see over Zoom in the last couple of months. I've seen weddings, I've seen funerals, I've seen divorces, legitimately all of those things, bar mitzvahs, birthdays, the highlights. It's sort of like the highlight reel is what's happening now. And what I'm finding is that people are taking a time to think, do I feel included? Do I feel like I belong in my own space? I am suddenly locked in with my own core unit, my own family, my own job, my own responsibilities. I don't have those distractions. I can't go get my hair done. I can't get my nails done. I can't go to a bar. I can't go watch a movie. I can't do so many of the distractions, the middle stuff that I used to do. But do I feel included? Do I feel like I am being heard? Are my needs being met? And so this idea of inclusion works both ways. If you can start learning how to be sensitive to other people and listening to learn, then you start realizing that you want other people to also listen to you. I have needs. I've learned with being with my family that I need like an hour a day on my own to decompress. I need my time. And it's been a learning experience to try to explain that to people around me. And so being able to use inclusion as just a springboard for almost every important area of our life, every important relationship in our life, that idea of listening to learn, what do you need? How can I be useful and supportive? And then at the same time thinking, what do I need to feel supported? Those are 2 very equal and important things.
What if you are the person that wants to be included in this inclusive community idea or even space, but you're not being heard? So I want to talk more about that, because what if I know how to listen, but you don't? How do I raise my hand or use my voice enough so that you understand that I want to be included?
You keep doing it. That's a really hard question because like we mentioned earlier, and like the person who commented before, it takes time. Sometimes you can say something, and again, I like to bring things back personally and not make it so far-fetched, right? Because some people don't know somebody with a disability, or they don't have constant conversations, so they may not relate to this conversation. But let's pull it personal. How many times have me and my husband, me and my children and their siblings had the same discussion over and over and over, right? We have tried to learn, we've tried to listen, and yet we're running in circles. And I heard something today, someone said, how do we go to evolve versus revolve? So the truth is, that was a good one, right? The truth is that you need to really work at it. So if someone doesn't listen to you the first time, think, what was the wrong, what did I say that I could have said differently? Was it my tone? Was it the timing? Was it just that I didn't deliver the information? Is it not me and is it really that person? What else can I do? Do I maybe go over their head? Do I maybe find someone else to bring in? Do I maybe get someone, in my experience, somebody with a disability talking is the most effective approach, right? Even we have parents of people with disabilities, and they're not even as effective as someone with a disability speaking. So if I'm a woman and I want to be heard in my space, it's important for someone to hear me say that. So it does take time, and it takes repetition for things to really change. And we know that. We know that from hard ways. We know that. And it's the same, but it can be done.
There's people listening tonight that's wondering in this time whether we are even included as God's children, no matter who you are. You know, in every community, there's an opportunity to either feel included or even feel excluded. What's your view on that? Like, how included do we feel when it comes to Hashem and His blessings, or even taking care of us?
Oh boy, I think that's a personal question, right? I don't know that answer. I certainly can't speak on behalf of God, but how do we feel when it comes to us being taken care of? I think that in my experience, relating it back to the disability community, I feel like the disability community is an amazing example of what it means to see care and righteousness and sort of a social justice, really the responsibility that we have to each person. And I think if we live that on a day-to-day basis, if I look at the other human being next to me, and it doesn't matter if I've never met them, it doesn't matter if they look different, sound different, act different. There are so many differences between humans, which is the way it was designed to be. That's the beauty of our world. And if we take the time to look at someone next to us and truly understand them and think about how do we interact in a way that is going to be supportive and inclusive and one where everyone feels heard and welcome, then how can we expect that God doesn't do that? Of course, that's what happens. What kind of God wouldn't do that? And the disability community is so practical. If there's somebody that cannot walk, right, something so basic, someone cannot walk, and there's steps to get into somewhere, how do we make that possible? It's such a clear example. But what if someone is a different color than us? What if someone is a different age than us? What if there's so many differences, but it's the same principle. One is just so obvious and not a question. And so in regard to God's personal blessings, personally, I believe that God looks at each of us the same way. I believe that God's role is to look at each person and say, how do I support you? And for us to do the same in that relationship. How do I support God? That's the same relationship discussion.
I love what you're saying, and it brings me to my next point, that I read a quote, and it's about the Rebbe, and it says the Rebbe's emphasis on how a hospital should be called a Beis Harafeh and not a Beis Hakolim. What's your view on that? Or even the fact that he spoke about the Paralympic Olympics, etc. What's your view on that?
So there's amazing work from the Lubavitcher Rebbe that has surfaced over the many years, and so many experiences of people that have spoken to him about how not to just be sensitive, right? That's almost a sticky word, not to just be sensitive to other people, but to how to speak to the essence of other people. So it's not being nice to someone else when we say something nice. In the disability community, there's people that say, there's so many different words, right? And things go in and out of being politically correct, and they change and words change. But the sensitivity to someone's soul, the sensitivity to someone's essence, that doesn't change. So when the Rebbe mentioned, for example, a hospital is Beit HaRofeh, a place of healing, versus the actual word that is used currently, which is Beit Cholim, a place of sickness, it's not a politically correct discussion. It's the essence of the discussion. A hospital is a place where you get better. It's a place of healing. And how much can that change our perspective of when someone with COVID goes into a hospital? Oh no, they're so sick. They're going in to heal. And it's a perspective shift. It's how we change our view on things. And so when people say, oh, I don't know, and they get stumbled over the words that they use, oh, I don't really know that terminology, or that doesn't really, it's not so important, or what can I say? But words are meaningful and they're powerful. And if we're thinking about the essence of every person and the essence of what we're talking about, it makes sure that we're careful and that we really are respectful of those people that we're talking to. So the Rebbe also mentioned with the Special Olympic, it wasn't actually Special Olympics, it was veterans from the IDF. And when he spoke to them and he called them, he said at the time it was in the 70s where the term handicap was the current use. And he said, handicap and I'm paraphrasing, but he said the term handicap doesn't speak to the true essence of who you are. Mitsuyanim, exceptional, that speaks to who you are, because God gives people things that they only can embody. And it's a hard discussion, by the way, because in the disability community, if you ask people, they say there's a concept of no pity and no heroism. Sometimes people will look at people with disabilities on a pedestal and they will say, oh, look, you got dressed in the morning, you're such a hero. You have children, you're such a hero. You're so amazing. Every day you have all these challenges and you're still smiling and happy. And or the opposite, right, where they look at someone and they say, oh, this poor individual with a disability, we need to support them. We need to be nice to them. It's the pity version. And there's a middle ground there, which is the essence. Neither one of them is, from my experience, has been appreciated by the disability community. They say, I'm not a hero. I am just like you. I get up out of bed, and just like you have your own challenges, I have my challenges, and I do what I need to do. I don't want to be looked at as a hero. And obviously, not with pity. So for each of us to recognize that every person has what they need in this world to succeed, and for each of us now, what an amazing message. We're all struggling. We all have mental health conditions, as we know, are on a rise. Suicide is on a rise. There's so many things that are hard right now. And yet, we really truly believe this message of inclusion, that every person is given what they need in this world, what they need, the people around them, the family structure, even if it sometimes feels really hard. And right now, if it always feels really hard. But this idea that each of us are given what we need, and to speak to the essence of every person, asking them, how do you like to identify, right? That's another conversation. How do you like to identify? What is it that is important to you? That is really what I believe. When you asked about God's blessing, that is how I believe God's blessing comes into this world. We look at another human being, God's creation, and are able to say, what do you need? How can I support you? Who are you? That's how this world changes.
Well, knowing that we were born for purpose, that we're not just here as accidents, I love what you are saying tonight. And I'm literally, in South Africa, we say, on your lip, I'm literally hanging on your lips, is the expression. You said something that talks about the essence of a person. And it brings me to this, seeing that our conversation is about inclusion, right? Earlier you mentioned inclusion of yourself. So while we are discovering our purpose and even trying to understand COVID, lockdown, while we're trying to understand other humans, while we're trying to understand people who are differently able, while we're trying to understand our neighbors, what about inclusion of yourself?
Inclusion of yourself, I think there's so much in this world, without going clinical on you, but there's so much to talk about being true to yourself in the sense of being authentic and trying to realize, what do you need to feel like you fit in, or to feel like you belong? Fit in is really the wrong word. To feel like you belong and like you matter. And I know that right now there's been social media memes coming out, take care of yourself, have a glass of wine. There's so many things that come out now, especially towards, I'm a mom of a bunch of kids, and in that space, I see a lot of it. Don't worry, just do self-care, know you're doing your best. And I've actually been very frustrated with all of those. I know I'm doing my best. I know that I'm trying to take care of myself, but it's hard. And so trying to understand yourself when it comes to the same way you want someone to listen to you, try to listen to the nice voice in your head, not the one that beats yourself up, not the one that, tells you could have done that better, or you should try doing this more. Try to listen to the one in your head that would be kind. Try to make it your friend who would really beef you up, right? And say, no, you're doing a great job. You're really good at that. Just try. And it's hard. But also, I think making known what your needs are, not in a nagging way, and using messages like I feel, or I would like. Those are very powerful statements, and ones that are, again, really important to try and use to the people around you, especially when we are in such close proximity and in such close parameters, and being able to say, it's okay when I need something. I deserve to have my needs met just like you do. And that's an important aspect of inclusion and self-worth, and mental health. We need to be on top of that, because it's a hard one now. And there's so much more to talk. That's a whole nother discussion, but there's a lot on that. I wanted to actually add, oh, go ahead.
No, please add, because you're totally speaking to my heart at the moment. Mindfulness is something that we practice and that we preach, on a daily basis, where you can feel a feeling and you don't judge it. And you just said it, that there's a good voice and there's a bad voice in your head, and you can feel sad and then just feel sad instead of beating yourself up about it. But please continue.
Well, it's true. And I actually want to veer for a moment. I want to jump back for a second onto the disability discussion. When this was being publicized, a friend of mine actually called me who has, I believe, a son with Down syndrome. And that person called me a while ago when that child was first born. And one of the things that I think is important when we talk about inclusion, and I know I'm pulling back from the self-discussion for a minute and I'm pulling out for a sec. There is a discussion now, especially in the world around us, about what does inclusion look like. And I think it's important to recognize that when we see things in the world, that becomes our reality, right? You asked earlier, what if someone doesn't listen? What if you don't hear? So how do we make a change in a different way when voices aren't always the things that make a difference? And if you look in the media today, social media, TV, movies, cartoons, newspaper advertisements, magazines, books, etc., what we see as our norm tends to become the norm. So if we see people with disabilities in marketing ads, in advertisements for clothing, if we see people of different races, different genders, different ages, different locations, right? There's so many differences that we can start putting into the mainstream, and it doesn't require a conversation. It's just a visual. And if it becomes the norm, one of the ways that we can actually change our perspective of inclusion and what that looks like is it doesn't become so foreign anymore. So if we see somebody who is a wheelchair user, or I have a book that I bought in a local bookstore here for my children that they were selling, and I picked it up, I didn't know anything about it, and I opened up the page, and it was a classroom. And in that classroom, they had somebody who looked like they were Asian, someone who looked like they were Muslim. They had a kid with a yarmulke, a Jewish skull cap. They had a wheelchair user, and they just had everybody in that space, different races, different colors. It was just amazing to see. And it was a book about dinosaurs. It had nothing to do. They didn't mention it. They didn't talk about it. It wasn't a book about diversity and inclusion. It was just the visual that made it such a powerful statement. And so I know I pulled back away from our inclusion discussion, but something that's really important to know is that the more that this becomes the norm, the more that we start thinking about other people all the time, not just in our heads, but really putting it out there all the time. If we think about it in our publications, in our brochures, in our flyers, in our synagogue high holiday appeals, whatever it is that we do, we can make changes without talking and without discussing. So I veered off from our discussion about inclusion on my own, but they still go hand in hand, right? The ability to do things publicly affects our private life.
I think it does, because then it doesn't become an issue. Immediately I started thinking of, I once had an event at a venue, and I realized that it's on 3rd floor and there were only stairs. And I know how to walk upstairs, but still I had an issue with it, thinking, what if someone is attending in a wheelchair? We can't get them to the 3rd floor. So, I mean, you just said it, that make it normal to have differences or to include everyone. I want to ask you though, and this is personal, and while I have your attention, why are you so passionate about inclusion and differently abled people?
It's a great question. I started my journey as a teenager and as a college student trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And during that time, I have a niece who is now turning 20. And at the time, she was a baby and she was born. And long story short, she ended up at 2.5 months old, born typically developing, a healthy infant, and ended up in the hospital for a rapid heartbeat. And she came out of that hospital with severe disability. She had gone under cardiac arrest and had no oxygen to her brain during that time in the hospital for 22.5 minutes. And she was 2.5 months old. And so when she left the hospital, she had severe disabilities, and there were so many unknowns, and we didn't know, and my sister, her mom, did not know what her life was going to be. And at the time, there was an amazing therapy that was going on in Canada, and she needed to go get treated there. And so I was a 19-year-old kid running around trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I sort of took one of the first 2-week shifts in Canada with my 9-month-old niece at the time to help her stay there for a longer time. We were all going to trade off and take turns so she could stay there for a longer period of time and get this therapy. And my shift was 2 weeks, and it lasted about 3.5 years. And so that was my introduction to full-time at the age of 19 to 21, caretaking and being involved in the disability space in a way that I hadn't been before. And so, you know, it's interesting that I never thought about it. It was just something that sort of happened in my life. I ended up becoming a physical therapist based on the therapy that I saw there. And of course, nothing just happens to us. I do believe that things happen for a reason. And so, however, that ended up taking me to where I am today. And you know, what's interesting is that for my niece, this concept of inclusion, the way that I talk about it, isn't practical for her. It's hard for her to be included in a lot of different spaces, and she sometimes doesn't even like to be included in those spaces. However, for the community around her, for our family around her, for those people to know that that's the norm and how to make that happen is what is important, and for her to be able to feel those things. And it's a whole nother discussion if she can or cannot, but she's wonderful, and her community loves her. But it's hard. It's, you know, it's a real discussion with real details, and the details matter. It's not a fluffy conversation that we just talk about that everyone is inclusive. It's a real conversation. And again, that idea that it takes time. And you know what? The truth is things take time. Things that matter take time. And if it's kind of meaningless, it doesn't usually take very much time. But something that really matters takes time, and it takes effort, and it takes energy. And sometimes we don't have it. But I think the message here is that we should try harder. We should try harder to look at those people around us and spend the time, because look at us now. That's who we have left, right? We're only with the people that matter. Spend the time, take the time, invest, and think about those around you. So, sorry, going back again.
No, you're great. Doctor, while we have you, we're going to end off soon, but I want to ask this. What is if you had to have a goal for us, and by that I mean a wish. So you wish that after this conversation, we all do, etc. And in that same breath, it would be the goal that you have for all of us that relates to this topic of tonight. So include everyone. Now is not the time to be judgmental. What would that wish be?
I will answer with a story, a quick story. Somebody called me recently, and it was a rabbi in the community, and he was building a women's mikvah. That's a ritual bath. And he said, we have to make it ADA compliant. It needs to be accessible. What can I do? And how do I do that? I don't want it to ruin the experience for a lot of the other women if it's going to not look as nice or it's not going to be great. And I called all these rabbis who are experts in this area, and they suggested we do it like this and a whole long thing. And I stopped the conversation and I said, let's pull back for a minute. Number one, have you asked any of these women what their experiences are? Have you tried to see what would change your experience? Would it be meaningful or not meaningful to have a grab bar? Or would it be interesting for you to have an experience where you know that when you walk into that space or into your synagogue or into your home, that the people in charge thought about every person in their community and they did whatever they needed to do to ensure that every person could be there as best as they could? Or is it going to be a better feeling for me to walk into a place that looks gorgeous, but I didn't even have the wherewithal to think of every person? Does that really mean that what I built is worth anything? If 99% of the people come, but that 1% of our community, the 1% of my family can't come, is that worth it? And it's a question, right? Some people might say, yeah, 99% is a really big number. It's really worth it. And some people, my hope, my wish, is that we get to a point where we realize that if we're missing the 1%, if we're missing the 25% of statistically people with disabilities that don't come, that don't feel included, or that have a mental health condition that we may not understand. And again, think of your own family members and my own family members. If we aren't being inclusive, have we done our job? In my children's class, I keep a certain kosher, a certain dairy kosher thing, and I'll leave it at that. And most of the kids in my kids' class don't. And we've had to have that conversation over and over. How do we make sure that at a birthday party, at a celebration in class, my children don't feel excluded, even if they have the other ice cream that they can eat and it's not exactly the same? Why can't we get to a point where we can make everyone feel like they matter, they are important? And our world has come a long way. Think about gluten-free, right? Something very simple. But we've come such a long way to thinking about people and making sure people have what they need. And my wish is that we do that even more. We really think about the people around us, our own family members, and we think about it before we do things, right? Not as an afterthought. Not, oh my gosh, we're doing this event upstairs and there's 3 flights of steps. Oh no, what do we do? There's someone with a wheelchair downstairs. But rather, before we start doing things, before I create a classroom, before I create a lesson for my students, before I create a schedule for my family, before I create a high holiday service for my community members as the rabbi, what do I think of beforehand? How do I start my conversations? What's my thought process? Where I start thinking, how do I make sure that every person, as many as I can possibly think of, can be included? And if I can't do it this time, how do I get there so I can do it better next time? And I'll leave with one last thought. Do I have a minute for one last thought?
Yes, you have 1 more minute for London.
Something very powerful when I started this probably about 10 years ago. Somebody said to me, a father said, I am a father and I have 4 people in my family. My daughter has autism. So that's 25% of my family has a disability. And if we go somewhere and 25% of my family cannot go there, they don't belong, then 100% of my family doesn't belong there. I think that that's the most important and impactful statement that we can make on this. If we don't figure out how we can include people, we lose them. And by doing that, we lose who we are, because we aren't whole without each of us. That's the truth.
Oh, wow. Yeah. We need to include people. You are incredible. This was a great discussion. I must say, just to recap, Chaya, before we go, I think one of the most important things you've said tonight, you've said so many, was nothing about us without us, or hashtag just ask. Just ask if you don't understand or if you don't know. Instead of thinking that you're going to offend someone. And then what I really loved about tonight's talk is the inclusion of self. Thank you for reminding us and also for teaching us. We really enjoyed this. If you stayed for this entire talk, yay. Otherwise, you can always see it live on our Facebook page. But this was incredibly insightful. Dr. Sarah Krantz-Cement, enjoy the rest of your vacation. And good luck with lockdown or whatever you have, your separation from the city while your husband's at work. Yeah, wish you only the best.
Thank you, Alana. It's been a pleasure getting to talk to you. Thank you. And thank you, the Messenger family. Much appreciated. Take care, everyone. Stay safe and stay healthy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Over to you.
Thank you for those unbelievable words of inspiration. I'm sure everyone will agree that now is not the time to be judgmental, but to make every effort to be inclusive of everyone around us. Once again, thank you so much, Ilana, for your dedicated time, your professionalism in the way you talk and deal with people, your inspiration, your warm friendship always. Take care. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
I don't know. I think it's live. Oh.